Okay.
So I'll skip the quote from Kumar, but it says that it's about the importance of typology. And in the literature, there are indeed so many typologies of writing system that have been proposed, for example, by Gelb, Diringer, Hill, Haas, Palgram, Sampson, De Francis, Daniels, Kumas, Faber, Sproat, Rogers, Miletus, and Duscheid, and so on. The focus of the paper is to talk about the classification of the Chinese writing system and the implication for writing system typology. And the main points I want to make are the following. So any classification of the Chinese writing system, just as logographic, morpheme, or morphographic, is incomplete or inaccurate. Each Chinese character generally corresponds to both the syllable and the morpheme. The Chinese writing system is thus both syllabic and semantic, and also the sound classification of the Chinese writing systems need to take into consideration both phonological and semantic dimensions. So in the following sections, we talk about the different classification of the Chinese writing system, and also the argument that the writing system of Chinese is syllabic semantic, and also the implications. So in the literature, there are different classifications of the Chinese writing system. I'll begin with one character, which is ma. So it's pronounced ma, and it means horse. And by the way, it's the year of the horse too. And one type of classification of Chinese writing system is, for example, Gelb. Here, the classifications only appear to recognize both sides of the Chinese characters. By both sides, I mean the pronunciation, right? So it's a ma, and also the other side is the semantic side, is the horse. So Gelb classifies the Chinese writing system as logosyllabic or word syllabic. However, what the term really means is that the writing system to him has a mixture of logographic and syllabic spellings. In the case of the Chinese writing system per se, Gelb actually considered it extremely logographic. However, he still called the Chinese writing system logosyllabic or word syllabic because it has a limited number of word signs which can be used in a definite syllabic function to express foreign words and names. So that's one type of classification. There's another type of classification of the Chinese writing system. In this case, they essentially only recognize the morphemic or semantic side of the Chinese characters. This includes Hill's classification of the Chinese writing system as morphemic, Cook's as meaning-based, Palgram, Sampson's, and Faber as logographic. Among them, Sampson's classification is worth particularly mentioning here because he makes a distinction between phonographic and logographic writing systems, and he classifies the writing system modern Chinese as logographic or morphemic. To him, Chinese characters stand not for unit of pronunciation, but for morpheme. And the third type of classification are those which classify Chinese, a classification that can be said to directly recognize only the morphemic or semantic side of Chinese characters, while at the same time only indirectly recognizing the phonological side. So this includes particularly Miletus and Duscheid's classification, also Joyce 2011. So they classify Chinese writing system as morphographic. So there are several quotes from Miletus and Duscheid studies. So for example, according to Miletus, neither graphemes nor subsegmental component graphemes in Chinese are directly phonographic. To him, it's inaccurate to refer to the Chinese writing system as a morphosyllabary. And in a note, he further continues, in most cases, morphemes in Chinese have monosyllabic phonological representations. Thus, although syllables are graphetically represented in Chinese due to spaces between graphemes, the correspondence between grapheme syllables only indirect, that is a consequence of the correspondence with morphemes. And furthermore, Miletus and Duscheid claim that the writing system of Chinese is morphosyllabic, but pay attention here, it really means, although it's not specifically indicated that the syllable level is not directly represented, but only melded with the morpheme level. So still only indirectly recognize the phonological side. And still another type of classification of the Chinese writing system are those which recognize both the phonological and the semantic side of Chinese characters. This includes the Francis and Kuma's morphosyllabic classification of Chinese writing system, Daniel's logosyllabary, and Chen's logographic. But pay attention here, Chen actually used logograph to mean morphosyllabic. And also, this includes Sprout and Rogers and their studies, their classifications. So in this case, while recognizing both the phonological and the semantic dimensions, they present the semantic dimension as a continuum. I want to focus here on what differentiates the classification of Chinese system as morphosyllabic. So what de Francis means by morphosyllabic, so here's a quote from him. So I use the term morphosyllabic in two senses. The first applies to the Chinese character taken as individual units. Individual characters are morphosyllabic in the sense that they represent at once a single syllable and a single morpheme, except for the 11% or so meaningless characters that represent sound only. The second sense of the term refers to the structure of Chinese characters and intended to draw attention to the fact that in most cases, a character is composed of two elements, a phonetic grapheme, which suggests the syllabic pronunciation of the full character, and a semantic element, which hints at the meaning. In the next section, I will focus on the Francis. I will develop here up to the first sense by the Francis. That is the Chinese characters taken at the individual units. So in the next session, I will to look at the Chinese writing system from how it functions, how it operates, and then propose that it should be recognized as a syllabic semantic system. As we know, I think most of us will agree, any full writing used to represent speech, the core operation of a full writing system is to establish correspondences between writing and speech, including the crucial establishment of correspondence between the basic graphic units, BGU, I call it here, a writing system, and the phonological unit it represents. The BGU of a specific writing system may or may not have meaning. When it does have meaning, at least in most cases, additional correspondences between the BGU and the semantics need to be established in the learning, use, and operation of this writing system too. So in the case of Chinese, its BGUs are the Chinese characters. If you look at the example in 1, you can see that there are 13 symbols here. There's 13 BGUs here, right? Yeah. So nearly all Chinese characters used in Mandarin Chinese represent a syllable. The vast majority of Chinese characters also have meaning. As a result, to learn and to use the Chinese character, generally speaking, is to establish not only the correspondence between the written symbol and the syllable, but also the correspondence between the graphic sign and semantics. For example, to learn the use of a Chinese character like this character, a learner of Chinese needs to establish the relationship between the character as a whole and the corresponding pronunciation. So ren, right, it's pronounced ren here, and also the correspondence relationship between the character as a meaning. In this case, this character means person. So this process is similar to the process of establishing the correspondence between, for example, the English letter B in box and the English phoneme B. Though in this case, no correspondence between this specific letter and any meaning needs to be established because the letter on its own has no meaning. So with respect to a specific BGU, predictive power will come to play after correspondences are successfully established. That is, the pronunciation and the meaning when the BGU has meaning can be more or less predicted when the BGU to use expressions new to the learner or user. So in English, when the learner establishes the following correspondences, letter T, T, letter D, D, letter M, M, letter N, and letter A, A, at least in some cases, then the learner can predict the pronunciation of the following words, even those unattested words like tad, tam, nad, and so on and so forth. In the case of a Chinese learner, the same process. So for a learner of Chinese who have established correspondence in A, so this character shu, book, this character qian, money, the third one, bao and bag, and fourth one, dian, store, and fifth one, fan, meal. Then the learner can, when they encounter new expressions that include these components, these BGUs, they can recognize they can predict pronunciation. They can even predict the meaning. So for example, shu and bao together is school bag. Qian and bao here is wallet. And shu and dian, shu dian here, bookstore. Fan dian, restaurant. Shu qian, the money for buying the books. And fan qian, the money for paying for the food. So it's important to note that in the shape of a Chinese character or component of a Chinese phonetic semantic character, like the qiu here. So the left side is the semantic side, the right side is the phonetic side here. So in the shape of the Chinese character or component like the left side, the right side of this character, there's nothing intrinsic that can inform us of its pronunciation or meaning. That is, the correspondences between the graphic sound and pronunciation, the meaning needs to be learned. In this respect, it's equally important to note that in the shape of the English letter or in the shape of any BGU of any writing system, there's nothing inherent that can inform us its pronunciation. In this case, the correspondence between the graphic sound and pronunciation also had to be learned. So for example, in the letter C, it can be pronounced differently in different languages, right? So it can pronounce ch in Hausa and c in Hungarian, zh in Turkey, z in Fijian, and k in English, and even ch in Old English. And the letter W, for example, it can pronounce w in English like we, but in Cherokee, it really stands for a syllable la. So furthermore, for example, from the Syriac letters, but unless you already know these letters, so from the letter per se, it's hard to tell how they're pronounced. Similar for the Thai examples, just based on the shapes, for any learner of these new symbols, the symbols per se do not tell us how they're pronounced. So the point here is that essential part of learning and using a writing system adopted by a specific language is to establish correspondence between the BGUs and their pronunciation and meaning when they are semantic. So Chinese characters are used to represent speech, and with only one exception in Mandarin Chinese, all these BGUs always represent syllables. So the exception here referred to the R, so when the use of the suffix, and therefore it's very reasonable for the Francis to claim that the Chinese writing system is 100% syllabic. So that's the syllabic side. However, a Chinese character at the same time also generally has meaning. It can correspond to a morpheme, even to a word. So for example, the character, this one, right, it has a pronunciation shu, and it has a meaning, which is tree. In this case, it not only represents a morpheme, but also word in contemporary Mandarin. So due to the fact that a Chinese character generally represents a morpheme, sometimes even a word, learning a Chinese character also means learning a Chinese morpheme and sometimes even Chinese word. And there are at least thousands of morphemes in probably every language. It's not surprising that there are a huge number of Chinese characters. Therefore, the large inventory of BGUs in the Chinese writing system is mainly due to the fact that Chinese characters represent morphemes and even words. The initial stage of learning Chinese writing is much more challenging than learning English writing, for example, simply due to the huge difference between the number of the BGUs used in the English writing system and the number of BGUs used in the Chinese writing system. However, given what learning a Chinese character also means learning a Chinese morpheme, even a Chinese word, the hard work in learning Chinese character will pay off at a later stage, particularly given the high rate of combinability in the use of these characters. I'll just give you one example here. For Chinese learner who has known this character, and this character. So D means low, Xue means blood, Ta means sugar, the low blood sugar. So from the meaning of the characters, they can predict kind of the meaning of the entire expression. Actually, the English one is a medical term for most English learners, for example, in the 7th grade or 8th grade, so they probably cannot even know the meaning of this expression, this word from the spelling. So hopefully I have convinced you that, how can we classify the Chinese writing system then? I think from our discussion is really a syllabic semantic writing system, given that its BDUs generally represent both the syllable and the morpheme. Any characterization of the Chinese writing system as only morphemic or logographic without also taking account its syllabic nature is inaccurate or incomplete. So briefly, some implication of this study. So given that the writing system like the one used in Chinese can be both phonographic and morphographic or morphemic, all the following dichotomies used in some writing system typologies or false dichotomies. This includes Crookes dichotomy between sound-based writing system and the meaning-based writing systems, Sampson's dichotomy between phonographic writing system and the logographic writing systems, and Meletis and Duchamp distinction between phonography and morphography. And more importantly, the study showed that the sound classification of writing systems requires consideration both the phonological dimension and the semantic dimension. So one approach would be a classification of the writing system basis what the BDUs phonologically correspond to and whether BDUs generally have meaning. So I've used BDU, but what do I really mean by BDU here? Here's a definition, but it may be controversial, but I think it's quite a reasonable definition. That is, as writing utilizes the visual modality, BDUs, visually speaking, refer to smallest and relatively discrete, linearly arranged writing symbols used as the basic operator units in the writing system. And noticed by Meletis, this almost universal trait of writing systems, that is, graphemes. Well, the BDUs are like graphemes, but because of the too many different interpretations of the graphemes, I use the BDUs here. So the graphemes here from Meletis are the smallest linguistic functional units, are simultaneously the smallest freestanding visual units that occupy segmental spaces and are constituted by the smallest empty space, the empty space between basic shapes. Similarly, Meletis and Duchamp claim that graphemes are almost uniformly the smallest units that fulfill the empty space criterion, are visually salient at being the smallest segmental units. We know the Arabic script poses a challenge here, but because of its writing mostly connected, but its BDUs can still be probably individuated with help of the dots as visual anchors and with the systems of the 6 non-connecting letters. So I'll end with the alternate typology by recognizing both the phonological dimension and the semantic dimension. So for the full writing systems, they can be classified into syllabic, segmental, and segmental syllabic. And for the segmental one, they can be further divided into consonantal and alphabetic. And for each of the categories, and then we can have the branches for the semantic dimension, semantic, non-semantic, and hybrid. For hybrid, it means there are two, like in the case of Japanese, there are two sets of systems systemically used in a script. So there's a kanji that have meaning, and there's the kana that generally just only represent the sounds. So syllabic, semantic, non-semantic, hybrid, consonantal, same thing, alphabetic, same thing, and segmental, syllabic, same thing, so semantic, non-semantic, hybrid. So in the case of Chinese, it's a syllabic, semantic writing system. In the case of Cherokee, it's a syllabic writing system, but non-semantic. In the case of Japanese, it's syllabic hybrid system. And in the case of Egyptian, it's segmental, consonantal, and semantic. Yeah. And for the Phoenician, is segmental, consonantal, but non-semantic. In the case of English, is alphabetic and non-semantic. And interestingly, if we adopt this classification, we may actually classify the Korean, Hindi, Thai, and Korean together as segmental syllabic but non-semantic. So it's like a collapse of the Korean and also the Abjads from Daniel's terminology. Yeah. I think I have presented the main points. I would just conclude here from the perspective how the Chinese writing system functions. Learners using Chinese characters generally process Japanese correspondence between the characters and syllables represented by them on the one hand, and between the characters and the semantics on the other. So a satisfactory classification of the Chinese writing system needs to take into consideration both the phonological dimension and the semantic dimension. After both dimensions are taken into consideration, the Chinese writing system should be properly classified as syllabic semantic system. Given that the writing system like the one used in Chinese can be both phonographic and morphographic, the so-called fundamental distinction between sound-based and meaning-based system, between phonographic and logographic systems, or between phonographic and morphographic systems using many writing system typologies is for dichotomy. And sound linguistically informed classification of the writing systems requires consideration both the phonological dimension and the semantic dimension. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chao, for that thorough mapping of the field and challenges that it presents. Do we have any questions from the audience? So I do have one. I found this fascinating. So your classification proposal is more on a spectrum of a theoretical side, if I can say that. I'm wondering if your proposal to focus on syllabus has any, or like syllabi, has any practical change to learners or for literacy development?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, actually yesterday I attended one talk by Dr. Wang, and in her talk, she mentioned, for example, for Chinese learners of the Chinese characters, they have phonological awareness too. So phonological awareness is something universal across different scripts. So that also indicates, in the case of Chinese characters, we cannot neglect its phonological side. We cannot say the phonological side is just indirect by corresponding with the morphemes or words. So it is the shape itself and the pronunciation and the meaning. The three, they are just in one.
Well, yeah. We are at the end of our time. I do apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. Thank you for your presentation, and we're going to move to our next presenter. Thank you, Chao.
Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you.